Peace, peace, peace. Welcome to another episode of Wild's the Dome. Today I have a very special guest. She's been on the show before. She's an activist, a scholar, PhD, Dr. Kimya Nuru Dennis. I appreciate you for coming through.
Thank you so much, brother. I'm so glad to be here again.
Indeed, indeed. You know, you're always welcome on the show. For everybody who is just tuning in, you're able to find these episodes on Spotify podcast and Apple Podcasts. Also, the Wild's the Dome album is on all DSPs, so you can definitely check that out if you need some revolutionary music for your headphones. So again, thank you for making time for us and coming through.
Yes, and I love just reading everything you write, listen to you talk, your hip hop, you're just a genius, but you already knew that.
See, I'm humble, but thank you. Likewise, it's likewise. That's why I like to bring you on so we can go ahead and expand our genius. You know what I mean, and put it together. But we just had Juneteenth, and I've seen a lot of people push back on the idea of Juneteenth. And like, what are your thoughts on some of the pushback from our own people on Juneteenth and the idea of African American emancipation celebrations?
Okay, so you already know what I'm gonna say. So I'm just trying to find a way that's not going to people who don't know how to do a real battle rap. They think it's an argument, right?
Right.
So we talk about 5 centuries of the brainwashing of our people. So many of our people have bought into that brainwashing. So they like to perpetuate falsehoods. So our people who feel like Juneteenth celebrations just started in 2021, right?
Right.
First of all, it's not true, as you know already. Originated in Texas, then in the past, let's say I'm about to say centuries, in the past 3 generations spread in parts of USA in different regions. This is why I tell our people that old song, read a book, read a blank, blank book. Like, we need our people to stop falsely claiming that we don't have access to factual knowledge.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Social media cannot be the introduction to knowledge. Finding a conspiracy theory book cannot be your access to factual knowledge. There's literally organizations that our people have created where you can find, for example, organizations in different regions of the nation that have had Juneteenth celebrations for 5 years, 10, 50 years. If you don't know about it, you need to ask yourself, why are you not involved in community groups? You ain't got to be a member of the groups to at least ask our people, what can you join? So that's not the same as celebrating because the government declared it. But you can also do that. As Black folks act so confused. Like, I don't acknowledge a lot of stuff for this nation. However, that's part of freedom. You can do that.
Right.
Just like we could talk about Memorial Day. Black folks want to say, no, we created Memorial Day. Whether we created actual Memorial Day, that could be up for debate too. But I ain't gonna fight over that.
Right.
Look here, Black folks. Be a good battle rap. Make it on facts, but make it on something that's deliberate and gonna have something that's change making. We're the only people around the world who consistently want to battle each other over the stupid stuff.
Right.
And nothing is produced to improve our people.
Right.
That's why we're the only group that struggles with the whole nationalism approach. Everybody else is good.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's exactly how I feel. And one thing that I noticed, which with the federalization of the holiday, right? Like you said, there are some people that have, I'll take it back. When I moved to Texas as a child, I had never heard of Juneteenth until I moved there, and this was in the 80s. And as soon as I got there, the first June 19th, I was living there, we heard about Juneteenth and the celebration. And, my parents ingratiating themselves in the community, they taught me about it, and we would go to, the parade and all of that stuff, right? I believe it was in Fort Worth. And I notice now that it has become, it's going to be two-part, because on one part, I want to ask you something. But I know that now that it's become more in the spotlight and it has national attention, first, I want to point out, I'm noticing that within certain aspects of the Black community, and a lot of it is online, it may spill over into real life, but we know that that's where the crazies play. So, I mean, it's expected. But I noticed that a lot of pushback from Juneteenth has come, like you said, from people that maybe just now heard of it, from 2020, and or even later than that. And then they get the idea that those that are a part of those hashtag groups where they want to delineate themselves from African people of the diaspora and the continent, they are attempting to gatekeep Juneteenth, as if all Black people don't have the right to celebrate this and haven't been celebrating with African Americans since its inception, right? And one point that I like to kind of think about is the irony of them attempting to gatekeep and saying this is an American holiday, when those Africans in Galveston who were enslaved were not considered American. What makes this holiday American? This holiday is Black, right? And it's American through it, where it was born and its inception. But I don't look at it as American holidays such as July 4th. I notice that now these politicians are attempting to treat this holiday the same way they treat the narrative on who Dr. Martin Luther King was. Now they say, oh yeah, this is America's second Independence Day and things of that nature, right? And so what do you think about the narratives coming from these hashtag groups who want to delineate themselves from the rest of African people who are now trying to gatekeep Juneteenth, and these white politicians who are now acting like Juneteenth is the second July 4th and wanting to say that this is a holiday that represents America righting its wrongs?
Here's the amazing thing of me being born and raised in Richmond, VA, it was the second capital Confederacy. I know how to be apathetic towards the unimportant people and the unimportant things. And both of those are unimportant people and unimportant things. That's one of the reasons why I deactivated the Twitter account months ago, because a lot of the Black folks on Twitter are anonymous because they're either cowards or they're not even Black folks. And that includes, unfortunately, some of the acronym people, and unfortunately some of the fellow Pan-Africans and some of the Black nationalists, African nationalists are not even Black folks. So it's all part of 5 centuries of distracting Black folks. People around the world literally think that Africans who are racially categorized now as Black, they consider us like puppies. They think they can throw anything and we'll just chase after it. And so that's the same thing that every politician around the world, not just white politicians, do that as well. You know what? If they want to make it a US holiday, okay, that does not change the historical fact of the origins of how our people celebrate it.
Right.
That does not change the fact that over the generations, Black folks spread it to regions across the nation of the United States of America in which we are here out of force.
Right.
That is not to change the fact that in parts of Caribbean, South America, parts of Europe, parts of African lands, and parts of Asian lands, that our people have spread Juneteenth celebrations because of chosen migration, because of military service. This stuff exists for generations. Mm. So Black folks who want to celebrate how our people have spread hip hop, spread fried chicken. Well, if you can comprehend that, then you can definitely comprehend how we also spread forms of celebration, and that includes Juneteenth.
Right. Well said. And that because that's the truth. And that is the thing. Like, we understand that during, that we have, obviously in America, we've had several what we would call great migrations, from southern states to the Midwest, to the West Coast, and to up north. And it's just like African people that were kidnapped and enslaved in America. We didn't suddenly end our traditions just because we got here. The same way someone from Texas who say, let's move to Milwaukee in the 50s, they suddenly didn't stop celebrating the things that they celebrated while they were in Texas. And this is how, a lot of things culturally spread with us before the idea of before the internet, right? I think a lot of people don't really understand not only the cultural continuity that we have with Africa, but the cultural continuity that we have as African Americans and how our things spread. And you're totally right, man. At some point, we have to center ourselves and stop caring not only about what these politicians, the narrative that they attempt to create, but though the people in those hashtag groups who are attempting to be divisive amongst African people. You're totally right. At some point, we have to stop caring, because as soon as we do that, they'll only have themselves to argue with,
And that's 5 centuries. And so we always have to remind our people that there's always a new method to distract our people. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about method, it's not about identity. So a lot of times Black folks will say, well, you can't highlight this different identity because that's a distraction. No, the identity is a reality for our people. We have various identities since the origins of humans. Right. So we don't have to ignore identities, right? The distraction is when people are telling you to downplay this to highlight this. It's like a permission slip. And a lot of the Black folks who claim to be outraged, who claim to be change makers, are the most obedient Negroes. Mm-hmm. And so they make a lot of change making with permission slips. Mm. If you have permission slips, that's because you're obedient.
Right. Right.
The people who are harming you, giving you permission, know that you're not changing a whole lot of things. And this is not a new problem. This is 5 centuries. And so I just want our people to realize that I can find some things amusing and entertaining, but I just ignore most things. Why? Because most things are very irrelevant. And unless it's humorous, unless it's something that's groundbreaking, we got to comprehend what our people have explained to each other forever. It's like, you're going to keep going down that trail.
Right.
The trail is basically telling you ain't going nowhere. We just here to give you some giggles and stuff. Or you're going to keep finding the trail that has consistent changes for you to do follow-up. So that's what our people are doing. Some of our people, a percentage of our people.
Right. And I think I always appreciate your perspective, and you're right. And to kind of pivot to, we spoke on the politicians and their narrative of Juneteenth. One thing that we saw recently that I'm pretty sure no one expected was Dr. Cornel West saying that he was running for president. When you first got the news, what did you think?
I I don't support political parties and politicians. So for me, I just want Black folks to just be knowledgeable and informed. So Dr. West, out of respect, I got a lot of Dr. West's books before white progressives signed off and approved of Dr. West. So I'm more so like old school Dr. West supporter. So, I mean, no political announcement interests me because it just takes a lot. I just encourage Black folks to not support anyone until they tell us what they're about to do.
Right.
And this includes Black political parties. When you read Harold Cruz's work, Harold Cruz also explained when he proposed the creation of Black political parties. And we have to always know, what does that mean to have that? Because Black folks, unfortunately, again, that's a consistency about our people everywhere around the world. We have a tendency to think that being Black is enough. And that's also, and I'm saying this as a sociologist and criminologist with a background in criminal justice, we also are the biggest scammers of our people.
Oh, yeah.
So our people financially, yes, we can talk about the government and all that stuff, but every day our people are scammed by our own people because Black scammers know that our people tend not to request evidence. Right. That includes when Black folks say they have a nonprofit. That includes when Black folks say that they're starting a reparations committee. That includes when Black folks say they starting a school for our people, and you keep bragging that you got a tour of a building, and damn it, 5 years later, that damn building is still empty, and your silly, goofy self is still donating on Cash App.
Right.
Why is the building still empty, people? Why haven't you been sent information about the curriculum, the course materials? Why haven't you been sent an audit? Right. I'm going to tell you something. Black folks know how to send data and follow-ups when they get grants and funding from everyone else. They know how to send audits. They know how to send curriculum evidence to everyone else, but they don't. Our people, because our people tend to be so desperate, that our people tend not to demand that. And unfortunately, almost every Black politician does the same thing. So when we talk like Black radical politicians, and that sentence doesn't work well together for a reason in the first place. Right. You know, whether they're going to be change makers requires our people to not believe the hype, you know. Don't believe the hype, like Flavor Flav said. Right. And those of us who tend not to believe the hype, we're considered though problematic a lot of times because we ask questions, we look for evidence. We're like, okay, you know, what you about to do with this money? And a lot of times people say, oh, you know, you causing trouble. Let us do what we got to do.
What about that idea that, you know, because a lot of people in our own community say things like, well, if you vote, like let's say, you know, because I listened to a few of Dr. West's interviews since he's announced his candidacy, and you know, they're kind of different depending on what platform he's on. If he's on like a Black conscious platform, you know, he's referencing Dr. John Henry Clark and CLR James and things and attacking imperialism and Zionism and things of that nature, right? Right. But let's say just for the sake of conversation that this is what he's really running on and he was sincere about that, right? But as a third party, you know, third parties don't normally win the presidency in the United States. And then so you have people in our own community, because I don't even want to mention white liberals at this point because we already know what they're doing. But we have people in our own community who are, you know, Democrats, because, you know, like I know, as a community, we have been extremely loyal to the Democratic Party. With that said, it seems like there's a lot of fear that's evoked in these political campaigns where it's like, if you don't, if a vote for a third party is an endorsement of Donald Trump, or if you don't vote at all because you're not, happy with any of the candidates, it's an endorsement for Donald Trump. And the idea that there's a huge difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, to me, I don't really see it, right? And I'm not going to say that there hasn't been, certain things within the presidency that maybe have made some people's lives easier, but being Black in America, there's obviously we haven't seen really any like radical change being brought out of electoral politics, maybe since, the days of the civil rights movement. And people also, obviously, when we look back, have their critique of that as well. But what are your thoughts on, just the idea that electoral politics and the fear that is pushed to where if you don't do this or if you don't do such and such, we're going to have this person in office and things are going to be terrible for us, when the material conditions of Black people haven't changed regardless to who's in office?
Well, that scare tactic is only sent to Black people. Like the vote blue no matter who is only said to Black people.
Right. Vote or die.
The vote or die is only said to Black. It's whole designed to Black people in the first place. So those of us who are staunchly opposed to supporting political parties and being dedicated to political parties, we're not saying you can't vote for a politician in a political party, but we're just saying it shouldn't be just because they are of that political party. It should be because you've actually done some research. And I also tell Black folks it's okay to vote local if you're not feeling like you're prepared or interested to vote national as well. And a lot of times people don't want Black people to have conscious and knowledgeable choices and voices. They want Black folks to just act like we are being terrorized, as we've been for 5 centuries, and be obedient Negroes.
Yeah.
And so those of us who are conscious and critical based on the knowledge that our people have taught to each other, that is a threat to our people who are dedicated to particular political parties. And that's usually Democrat, Republican, but that's also very problematic for our people who are loyal to certain socio-cultural and socio-political approaches where they use jargon. And this is one thing I tell Black folks. As a Pan-African Black nationalist who, when I collaborate with organizations, I'm opposed to Black folks joining certain identities that are not for our people. And Black folks will attack me to support these European things. But, that's just an example of the brainwashing on both sides,
Right.
We're telling you to escape this, but then you're going to join another European stuff because that's a European form of radicalism, right? But that's an example. When you start off with saying Dr. West did an interview talking about imperialism, Zionism, one thing I ask Black folks to do, and this includes my colleagues in academia, I ask my colleagues to put this in everyday language. I'm really, really tired of hearing terminology like fascism, anti-fascism, imperialism, Zionism. Like all of these things, what does it really mean? And when people say, well, just read about it, I'm like, most of y'all haven't really read a lot of stuff. And the stuff you've read is mostly European-based stuff. And European-based means, even if it's a Black person as the author, it's mostly this falsehood that Europeans are the presenters of radicalism, anti-capitalism, anti-exploitation of labor, and all that stuff, right?
Right.
So this is where I always tell people, if you want Black folks to support you as being different from all these other people. Now we need to see that you are so dedicated to us that you will inconvenience yourself and explain what you're saying to us.
Right.
Because I tell you what, they do that for poor and working class non-Black people.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
When poor and working class non-Black people say, I ain't read nothing, they don't just throw the Communist Manifesto at their foreheads and say, wipe off the blood.
Right.
They don't just say anti-fascism, damn it. They don't just say, you know, all types of nonsense. Read this pamphlet, come to our meeting. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
They literally will have entire like hugging workshops with non-Black people to explain things. Like even poor working class white people with European ethnic nation backgrounds of the Europeans who initiated this terminology that these Black folks use in the first place.
Right.
They will literally have workshops with Irish Americans,
right.
Italian Americans, you know, Russian Americans, the list goes on. So if you have the time to do that as a Black politician, but for your own people, you're all of a sudden stern, then that's a problem. Right. I do challenge our people to not claim to be ignorant and not claim to have access to resources. You know, I do support our people reading opposing sides and being conscious to have that internal debate. So I don't want our people to always expect people to explain. But from a political standpoint, politicians, that's literally their job to explain it.
Right. That's literally their job. You mentioned something that kind of sparked a thought that I want to kind of get your opinion on. You know, we had the you know, Black Books movement of the 60s, and where, you know, we had these Black bookstores that were popping up and all over the nation, and they became cultural centers where people would meet and discuss the politics of the community, discuss the books that were there in the inside the bookstore and things of that nature, right? And so we have in a lot of places, our Black bookstores are, and not all of them, but some are, you know, struggling to stay open after, you know, being open for 20-something years, right? You know, we can look at things like Amazon being part of the reason why a lot of brick and mortar bookstores are going away. But at the same time, our bookstores were literally more than just bookstores, right? And I don't see it as just being a thing as Amazon, the Amazon effect. I think a lot of it is more on the shift of consciousness in the community. But what would, and you speak about often too about the importance of reading these books and reading our scholars and reading opposing views, just so we can stay educated and be able to have these discussions about what we're going to do next. Like, you know, we know some people, they like to read and collect information just to seem intelligent and to talk over their people. But sincere people obviously are reading in order to share this with others, and to also, whenever we have these discussions, to be able to understand the nuance and context of the history and help develop and formulate strategies for our communities at home and abroad. With that said, we have access to so many things compared to what the people before us had access to, as far as how easy we can get a hold of these things. Why now? Because I can even see this in certain aspects of what we would call the quote unquote conscious community, where a lot of them are getting swallowed up by these ideologies that we know are pseudo and harmful and destructive, And if they read the stuff that they said they read, they would know that what they are dealing with is destructive. Like, I'm not going to name any names, but there's a guy that one of my brothers just told me about. I mean, I knew about him, but one of my brothers told me about a show that he did. This guy has like 1 million subscribers, right? And he said something to the nature that he was inspired by Huey P. Newton, and he was inspired to become rich and wealthy by Huey P. Newton. And we know Huey P. Newton was against this capitalist system and imperialism. And there's no way you could read any of Huey's works and think, oh yeah, he's telling me that what we need to do is get rich. Saying that to say this: what happened to the real push and the real understanding of those that are occupying these spaces, that it's one thing to be able to articulate yourself, but to be informed, to read these books, to be able to share it with the community who may not even be aware of some of these things. Like my friend and brother Paul Scott, he out in Durham, he gives books to the hood every day. You know what I mean? Every day. And I salute him for that. But why is it? And we used to have a bookstore called The No, and you know about The No with Bruce, right? And
I was in Raleigh for 8 years.
Yeah, so but where are our Black bookstores going, and why are we not promoting reading? And I'm not talking about just about Kemet and all of this stuff, like reading our books, by Huey, and reading Garvey's works, and real political theory. Like, what happened to that?
Goodness gracious. So the work that I do as a sociologist, I could explain that in an entire special topics course for the whole semester. So first, I do want to start on my outline is, so if I forget anything else, just remind me what you said. Okay. All right. So first, for Dr. Huey P. Newton, Dr. Huey P. Newton's life had struggles throughout, and especially after the Black Panther Party was ended, and it could have possibly been some mental health struggles as well. But I do want to clarify that being wealthy does not mean being a millionaire, and being wealthy does not mean exploiting labor. The origins of Black capitalism is not exploitation of labor. So this is where, although anti-capitalism and anti-exploitation existed before the European form of anti-exploitation, anti-capitalism was forced on us, particularly through Communist Manifesto stuff. Right. I do also want to highlight that we really need our people around the world to stop pretending that the only cons are in capitalism. Like, part of knowledge is facts. Right. Facts exist even when people are outraged that you're highlighting facts. So people who are pro-communism, and by the way, people who are in denial, communism is Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. I'm a sociologist. We teach that in every class. Unfortunately, a lot of sociologists teach it in an inaccurate way. Most people don't know the original forms of socialism. They know Marx's form of socialism that kind of goes in the corner of communism a lot of times. You got to know the pros and cons of both of those. You can't just say capitalism is a problem. You also have to understand how capitalism is integrated with components of socialism. Black folks who don't understand that, you got to figure out then, where do your taxpayers' money go? Right. Taxpayer money goes to some things that outrage you, but it also goes to some things that can be used to your benefit. And those people who are talking about reparations, I promise you, the same way they use your taxpaying money to remove Confederate monuments and Confederate names from buildings. By the way, yes, you are paying for something that you demanded to be removed, so you are paying for that. More than likely, if reparations do ever happen for our people, it will oftentimes be used through our taxes as well.
Right, right, right.
So that is a component of socialism combined with aspects of, component of capitalism that combines with components of socialism for people who want to understand how all of that integrates. And so, but people want various components of that, they will just understand one version of something. So I do want to highlight that. If you want to understand the origins of Black capitalism, you got to understand what Booker T. Washington proposed, what Dr. W.B. Du Bois proposed, and he didn't become communist until he was 93, and that's because he was poor, he was fired from academia, fired from NAACP, white communists helped him financially, okay? Right. Marcus Garvey used Booker T. Washington's foundation from up from slavery, and then Harold Cruz used a Black capitalist approach to the economic foundation that Harold Cruz wanted to use, and Harold Cruz left communism but wanted to add some components of communism after Black folks had our own foundation. Okay, so I say all that because I do want Black folks to understand stuff that's not put, unfortunately, in most classes around the world, and most celebrated publications present Black folks with a very white version of everything.
Oh, and also too, before we even go any further, and you're totally right. And one thing that I've noticed in a lot of leftist circles, and a lot of times our people get brainwashed by white leftists with the idea that communism will cure the race problem, as if that's not a magic button to where communism or socialism will cure the race problem, because we know that in certain socialist nations, we know that Africans in Cuba, whether they are for socialism or not, will still tell you that there is racism that they experience, just like Africans abroad. But go ahead and continue.
Yeah, and as I explained when I was interviewed this week, and also I have a video on Instagram and TikTok where I explain, our people have to understand, when you celebrate the revolution in Cuba, in Argentina, when you celebrate the revolutions that you say were brought to Africans, you got to realize these people were Europeans.
Right.
I need to highlight that. Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, you can celebrate them, you can appreciate them, you got to still understand their Cuban origins. Spain, their European origins. Spain is Europe, right? You know what I'm saying? So there's so many things that our people have to acknowledge. All right, so with that in mind, when talking about the issues of Black bookstores, Black folks just have to keep updating ourselves with changes that are happening. And there are some bookstores that are doing that. They're doing more things virtually. They're doing more events. They're hosting concerts. They understand that some of us, we do a lot of shared Google Drives where, like, those of us who used to be on Twitter, who did like the shared Google Drive, we'd send a link, be like, here's a whole bunch of Black folks reading. I want y'all to read this Pan-African stuff, So, we're doing that, and we're not charging our people. Right. So that's a sense of competition. We're not trying to do that, but we just really want knowledge to be accessible, because we're thinking about it from like a library standpoint, but from a book club standpoint, a bookstore standpoint, they might see it as competition. So I want them to think old school hip hop. There is no competition because we are the best. You know what I'm saying? Right. They need to just update that there are a lot of freely accessible readings and writings and stuff. So there are some bookstores that are doing those updates. And so that's just, they just got to keep making those updates. Right. And so,
do you think also too, though, because let's say from the 60s to the 80s, right? Where, you had jazz, which was in a lot of circles considered, rebellious music. Then we had in the 70s when soul singers, well, they happened in the 60s as well, but in the 70s, a lot of soul singers, had socially conscious lyrics in their and their music in the 80s, early hip hop. We know with Rakim and Public
Goat.
Enemy. Yeah,
Goat.
the GOAT already. The GOAT. And we know all of this was intelligent music that was speaking about the times. Do you think, and I would never generalize Africans in America as to say that we don't read, because I don't believe that to be true. I just think culturally things are a little bit different than what they were. But do you think where film, music, and things of that nature are in 2023, has that affected our psyche as a community to where things like Black bookstores may not be as important as they used to be?
It can be that. I mean, that's why the humans are complex since the
Right.
origins of humans, right? So it's always
Right.
going to be this plus this plus this, because there's always new technology. So that will be shaped by access to music, wanting to watch movies a lot of times, access to PBS documentaries. I love watching
Me too.
PBS documentaries. They be
Me
showing me
too.
Sam Cooke. I be watching that
Me
Sam Cooke
too.
the same way, knowing good and well I got Sam Cooke card. And they always be like, you can purchase now. No, I'm just gonna watch this documentary every time it come on PBS.
Right.
And it's 3 different versions of PBS on my network. So that's part of it. Also, people accessing things on YouTube, accessing things on just overall social media outlets. Everybody got a daggone podcast.
Right.
So that's another complexity. This is why we want Black folks to know how to research. Research means you don't always see facts. There's going to be some falsehoods. Falsehoods have existed since, humans have existed for over 1 million years. Humans love falsehoods. And some of it's because of spiritualities, religions, what your grandma taught you, what your mama and daddy taught you. But the whole point of liberation and freedom is being able to access all of this and have the knowledge where you can kind of assess whether something's not really accurate. And that's the thing about Black bookstores. Black bookstores also were a place to liberate our people to read some stuff that's some straight up nonsense. Like, on the real, there are some bookstores where you go there and it's like, here's the knowledge floor. This other floor, this the who the hell done published this?
Facts.
A lot of self-published things, but in a way you're kind of proud. Like a say it loud Black and I'm proud kind of way, but on the other way you're kind of like, this messed up that this got published.
You know what's funny? You said that because I got some from back in the day. They're in boxes now, but I got some crazy books that I probably bought from Black bookstores when I was a kid that I thought, just because it was there that and you look back on it now, you're like, yo, that's right, exactly.
It's like, I'm not going to call out the groups, but when you see them on the corner and you want to support our people.
Right.
And you know what they about to give you is nonsense, but you're like, here's $5.
Right. Yeah.
But so Black bookstores just have to do those updates.
Yeah, understood.
So that's the complexity. And I do want to add, I think about outsiders as a last minute thing. So one way to understand how outsiders connect with the problem, and outsiders are non-Black folks, non-Africans. Outsiders are part of the problem also because most of our people, none of us can get away from outsiders. But I don't care how pro-Black, whatever you are, even if you're in a space that's 100% our people, you're in a nation and you think it's only your people, find out where the economics come from, right? Find out the curriculum that you're learning, including medical schools. So we're always surrounded by outsiders. So that also shapes Black bookstores. Who are the publishers? Where are you getting funds and resources? If you're really, really seen as only reaching Black folks too much, then that's going to also shape how you're advertised. So you're going to be doing a lot out of your own pocket. And I'm proud of our people who do a lot out of our own pocket. That's where I mostly donate my time and my money and resources to our people who are doing stuff out of their own pocket. And I will say, though, when you highlight the white progressives, white anti-fascists and all them, that loses my interest. And one example of highlighting white progressives and white anti-fascists is when you're celebrating our history from a New York Times bestseller standpoint.
Right.
So we can appreciate our people who've done New York Times bestsellers, because our people deserve awards and bestsellers. The problem is when Black folks ignore our centuries of writings, most of them you've never heard of, because they don't receive outsiders' approval. And then Black folks want to only celebrate something that's been celebrated by outsiders, right? And that's how a lot of Black bookstores are struggling, because that's the only books you see are the ones approved by outsiders. And that makes me disgruntled, because I'm here for my people, and I'm like, can we celebrate all of our people who've done this work? And a lot of Black authors actually don't write like history stuff. We have Black artists, we have comic book characters,
Afrofuturism, all kind of things.
Afrofuturism. I mean, we got Afro punk, we got everything. Afro romance. You know, when we're talking about different, I have the African sexualities books. There's just so many things our people have always done. So it's not always talking about oppressions and demands for justice, because our people can have a full spectrum. We don't wake up thinking about oppression and then go to sleep thinking about, you know what I'm saying? That's just not how, and if and any of our people who are living like that, you really need to go to a Black therapist every week. Because that's also another way that we need to self-reflect. So Black bookstores just need to have a really good staff and a marketing consultant who can say, these are all the different ways to capture reaching our people without it all being approved by outsiders.
Let's drill down on that for a minute. All right. So why do you think white liberals are approving some of these Black books, and they get, put in the New York Times bestsellers list, and then, Oprah will talk about them, and these books that they choose become, they'll blow up, and they'll become a representation of, they'll be a representation of knowledge and understanding in whatever field that book is dealing with, to the whole entire world, when obviously it wasn't us that, because I can name a lot of books that are like that, and I know you can too, right? We don't even have to, and authors who are kind of making a killing doing this. But why are, like, what's going on with that, as far as this whole Black author to white liberal to New York Times bestsellers list pipeline? Like, what's up with that?
Let's talk about 5 centuries ago. No, I'm joking. No, I mean, but it's the same pattern of, I just always say that because I just want Black folks to understand this is just kind of like the same thing over and over again. It's not just white liberals, because you have to remember white progressives consider themselves different than white liberals, right? And white anti-fascists consider themselves different, and then Marxists come in, and then communists come in, and it's like, and so this is where just people have to understand any group of people who are consider themselves the signature of our existence, the signature of our authenticity, the signature of our knowledge. Our Africans, before Europeans created racial categorization, we have hundreds of thousands of years of existence, right? And then, we had the Arab Muslim colonizers of parts of Africa, and then 5 centuries of the European colonizers. And then, of course, that's the racial categorizations. So we have a whole lot of knowledge and writings that our people have done before outsiders' opinions matter. Like, outsiders' input mattered in the sense of, like, trading products and stuff like that, but it wasn't like,
Some of the sad thing is, because just like you, if I like, well, me personally, I like to get hard copies of. I haven't gotten to where I can just read ebooks like that, but
it's bad for your eyes also.
It's too much blue light, right? And but as you know, a lot of our great books that people may not be up on, and then you know, they hear about it somewhere and like, oh, okay, yo, I want to get this book, and it's out of print, $500 on the
Yes.
internet.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you know, that's so I know that can be discouraging for a lot of people. And you know, it'll drive them to go get maybe some of these books that were, I guess, approved by white progressives. I don't know. It's
That
just
if it's it would. I mean, honestly, it's so you think about it like if you try to access Dr. Anna Julia Cooper's A Voice from the South, there's quite a few electronic versions, and it's difficult to find a hard copy that's not expensive. The same thing happens when you're looking for certain Harold Cruse books, depending on where you search. They're not covered in many libraries, a lot of stuff, but you can, this is why I just tell Black folks, libraries and K through 12, colleges and universities, and public libraries go based on request. If our people keep submitting online and in-person requests, then libraries, because you know, as faculty, I was part of the library assessment. So we help determine books that were never checked out. Do we still need it? Do we still need to keep it historically, or is it something that we can donate elsewhere because ain't nobody interested in this book anymore, right?
Right.
But Black folks have to realize that we can request, and people who are students can say, okay, this is not in this library, but I can submit a request to see if we can get it from another library. But Black folks have to realize when you're borrowing something, you got to return it.
Right.
You got to explain that. Now, if you want bookstores to request it, it has to be evidence that if they order a stash, that people are going to buy it. And that's the difficulty with bookstores, because publishers actually, a lot of things go out of publication. Like as professors, we're not allowed to request certain books for school bookstores because sometimes publishers stop publications in certain cities or states or schools because maybe people weren't purchasing as much. So that's also based on how much revenue is going to be brought in. So this is just where Black folks, when we talk about, you know, Black folks love to say, you know, we are the customers, you know, our money matters. Well, okay, so let's apply that to access to books as well then.
Right. And you know, it kind of reminds me, because I read recently about how at one time, like the works of Zora Neale Hurston had went into somewhat obscurity, and Alice Walker, you know, wrote about her, and then you had all of these people across the nation request these Zora Neale Hurston books, and not only did it, you know, not only did it they republish her books, but it kind of put, and rightfully so, Hurston in the proper light of, you know, being a literary genius that she was, and that was all due to, you know, like you said, we have to request. If enough people request a work, we live in a nation where if somebody feels like they can make some money from it, then they'll republish those books due to the simple fact, if nothing else, just to be able to make money. You know what I mean? And so, but I wanted to ask you this as well. I know, this is obviously a sign of the times, but as you mentioned often, 500 years, Cop City in Atlanta, where they are building, you know, a compound, state-of-the-art compound designed to militarize the police more than they already are. And obviously, this is something that would, in my opinion, would spread to other major cities across the United States. During these protests, we've had people be killed, unarmed people be killed simply for protesting. We've had protesters thrown in jail and charged with things that can get them some real time. And you know, anybody who's Black knows about the militarization of the police, whether even if they can't articulate it properly, because we all have our own experiences or experiences with friends and family. And then, we have books like The New Jim Crow that became popular when it came out, that helped people who may not have known to the extent this was a problem. But now here in 2023, I look at Cop City as like a police military base, right? But I want to know what your thoughts is on Cop City. Why do you think they're doing it? And could this really be a trend that spreads across the United States?
Yeah, so I want Black folks to learn about the 1033 program. So Black folks can do internet searches and learn about 1033 and how those military gear are used for police departments across the nation, including where I live now in Baltimore. So Baltimore Police Department and other police departments. And this includes Black cops using military gear for their own people. This is why I always tell Black cops, there's a difference between you hanging out at our fish fry together versus you hosting a fish fry with the police department using our taxpayer dollars, saying that you're reaching Black folks. All right, so I just want Black folks to learn about the 1033 program, learn that these are examples of how tax money, and because tax money goes into military, even if you support military, you support our people who have served in military, you still can say, okay, there are some really bad things going on because of the military and the leftovers of the military, okay? So when you're talking about the increased militarization, Cop City is actually not shocking. When people have to realize protesting in the streets, I mean, protests happen around the world hundreds of thousands of years, right?
Right.
Decision makers know that particular collectives of people will protest, but in terms of being decision makers and change makers, that's not going to happen, especially if you're in communities and collectives where you don't have access to preventive measures for emergencies. And police are not first responders, but however, unfortunately, police are treated as first responders. Okay. And I'm someone who volunteered to train police in mental health and stuff. And
before you go any further, can you explain that to the people, what you mean? Because I think that's extremely important, because we've seen so many people, especially our people, have mental health crises and get treated like criminals and sometimes even killed. So if you can you speak to that and then go into what you were saying about Cop City?
Yeah, so every person who exists can have a mental health crisis, right? I specialize in Black health as well, Black suicide, substance use. So Black folks need to understand mental illness, understand substance use. All of this includes our people who are in tune with nature. That's one thing a lot of our people say, I'm in nature. I only use nature. A lot of the things that our people use, overdoses can include materials that come from nature. A lot of drugs come technically from nature, and they have a different effect on the body. And so we all Black people have either had altercations with police or have had family members with altercations and have family members beaten by police, killed by police. So there's no Black person who's an exception. Education level, whether you're a cop, there's no exception of having that experience. So this is why police not being first responders is something that we always want people to understand. When there's an emergency, when someone's having a mental health crisis, the mental health crisis can be stress. It could be because of domestic violence. It could be because of anything that's happening. No matter how much we do crisis intervention team training for police, to improve crisis de-escalation training for police, police are going to resort to what they were initially trained to do more often than not. And this includes Black cops. This includes women cops. This includes cops who are LGBTQIA. I'm saying all this because we have to understand, no matter the demographic and identity and experience of cops, most cops who actually want to keep their job and not be put behind a desk, they tend to defer to being a cop first and foremost.
Right.
And there could be that inner turmoil, but, and I'm saying this as someone who, I have my former students, some of whom are cops, you know what I'm saying? And so a lot of people think that they were going to change being a cop. Like, I'm going to change this police department. I'm going to be a different kind of cop.
It ends up changing the person more than they
Well, it has to.
Yeah.
It has to, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the reality of law enforcement, and that's around the world, including 100%, you know, police stations that are mostly Black cops as well. So that's why ideally you don't want police to be the first responders. That's why there are some states that have tried to make it so that if you call 911, there's something that will switch you over to a substance use emergency. Some of us are getting more and more trained in Narcan, so that when there's an opioid overdose, which is distinct from other substance use overdoses, you know how to help people, but they always have to remind you, this Narcan does not help if someone's having a cocaine overdose or anything else. So we're trying to get more and more Black folks to be trained so that when someone's struggling with an overdose right in front of you, whether it's a family member, you at the grocery store, you at the gas station, you see a random person walking down the street, you're not gonna be like, dang, yo.
Right.
Or just call the police and be a spectator, because
right.
So those are examples of, so these are all examples of preventive measures. This is why we want people in general, not only Black people, but oftentimes it's Black folks who have been given these scare tactics since Emancipation Proclamation, Juneteenth, since Jim Crow. That's when, of course, USA police were brought in. White folks, you know, formed their cops to let Black folks know you free, but, you know, now we're going to control you in a different kind of way.
Right.
And so that's why we want Black folks to understand that we do want more preventive measures. We want more resources for our people to help each other. I don't want our people to use the phrase police each other. Right?
Right.
I don't want us to, the word police, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's already a negative connotation in our community, and not just our community at this point. For a lot of communities, just that word alone is a bad word.
Yeah, so we don't need to say police each other. It needs to be support each other. And it doesn't need to be street justice either. Because if now you're talking about supporting this notion of whoop everybody ass,
right.
then that's also problematic. It perpetuates the street violence, because like I'm in Baltimore, I'm from Richmond, VA, which also Richmond, VA used to be the high homicide city in the nation in the 90s. So you can't celebrate street justice and then be like, why Black folk killing each other?
Right.
You got to understand that could be done also because of street justice that our people keep saying is okay. Right. So anyway, so Cop City is going to keep happening. Stuff like that is going to keep happening and coming from our taxes, because there are Black folks who support cops. And I'm not saying people have to be anti-cop in the sense that the scare tactic is happening, because first of all, the whole defund the police phrase that became popular over the last 5-10 years, Black folks have demanded changes for more than a century regarding policing, regarding incarceration, right? So I just keep telling Black folks, like, when you're adopting phrases, whether it's from MSNBC, CNN, or wherever, you're adopting something that white progressives have told you they approve. Right. Like they told you to shut up forever. Right. And then they're saying, okay, that's the same as what white conservatives say, right? So the Cop City is an example of our people oftentimes not having access to resources. The funds will go into these kinds of things to keep training police using military type training. A lot of cops are former military. the trainers are former military or even current military.
And don't some police departments get like I guess some of the hand-me-down equipment from the military as well?
That's the 1033 program, right?
That's
1033 program
right,
is the
right.
hand-me-down.
Mhm.
And also when they talk about mental health trainings and stuff like that, a lot of police departments want the police officers or someone to be trained in that. So they're the ones who take over everything. They don't even bring like mental health professionals in.
Wow.
They do everything. So I just say all of this, the cop city is just, when we talk about the police state, I need Black folks to say, let's go beyond catchphrases. Let's go beyond jargon. The same thing I said with imperialism and all that stuff. And let's say, well, what are we really going to accomplish now? Because when we use the white progressives terminologies and the white progressives forms of uprising and protests, it always results in having to be obedient to at least one side of the oppressor. You know what I'm saying? And people will always penalize Black people. Like, even if the white progressives still our form of outrage, they still, what we've demanded, they pretended that they created this demand, but we're still the ones penalized. So when we say, like, Black folks for generations have demanded changes to police departments. We're not new to this whole protest routine.
But a lot of these, like you mentioned, a lot of these news channels, groups, and they create these phrases as if this is a new idea and as something we haven't been saying.
Yeah, CNN, Fox News.
Yeah. And so, but like, what effect does that have on the psyche of Black people who are, you know, seeking change whenever they are, you know, getting their talking points from these quote unquote progressives, compared to going to the root of where or going to where Black people have been speaking about this idea for years. And I'll give you an example.
They aren't seeking changes. They aren't seeking changes. Like, Black folks who are truly seeking changes are connecting with the community groups that are doing this work. Right. And some of these community groups are getting funds, but a lot of these community groups are, like I said earlier, Black folks spending money out of our own pockets. You know what I'm saying? Based on Black demands that have existed for generations. And we know that we're penalized because when we demand changes to police departments, what police departments do is that they take longer to respond to emergencies. So this happens across the nation. Police, and this can happen with Black cops. And I'm saying this again as a criminologist with a background in criminal justice. And so everyone will deny that this is reality. But again, this is reality. What police departments do to Black folks who demand changes is they try to prove that we really need them exactly as they are funded, or that they need to have more funds. The way they try to prove that is that when some kind of tragedy does happen, it could be a medical emergency, it could be your car's burning, it could be anything. Things take a little bit longer. And it's like, well, you can't file a complaint against us because you said you don't need us. You was just on the local news saying you need our funds to go to your schools and your medical services. So whenever Black folks say we need more funds to our schools, more funds to medical and health organizations, reduce the food apartheid, reduce the city planning and city design that puts liquor stores, tobacco shops in our areas and keeps police here to monitor, not for safety, but for something completely different. City planners, police, and politicians are very vindictive and very petty.
Did you ever see
that's what happened.
Did you ever see that clip? It was from when he was a senator, I believe, when Joe Biden was talking about, you know, his tough on crime bill, and you know, and I may be conflating what him and Bill Clinton said, but they both said something similar, one of them said it then, and one of them, and Bill, I believe, said it recently whenever Hillary was running. But they were saying things to the nature like, you know, the Black community wanted this. You know, they were tired of 10-year-olds robbing old ladies. And I'm like, what are y'all talking about? You know what I'm saying? Like,
oh, this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, you're right. No, that's what I wanted to say. But like, it's like, oh, it's
that's
you guys asked for this, is what is the narrative that they'll push.
So okay, so this is the complexity of it, and I explain this when I teach the crime courses. So it's similar to when we talk about the crack cocaine epidemic and the incarceration of our people who were struggling with addiction and selling, particularly crack cocaine, since the 1980s. Yes, late 70s, 80s, Black politicians and some Black folks were more terrified, outraged, and demanded the police to just step in.
Yep.
That happened. You know, I mean, I always use New Jack City as an example. That's 100% Hollywood. But, you know, in real life, a lot of people can think of real life examples where you saw that trauma in their own family, saw that trauma with the crack house, saw the trauma with addicts on the streets. And that was at a time, because remember, opioid epidemic among Asians, among Native Indigenous people, among Black folks have existed for generations before white people declared an opioid epidemic, right? So the crack cocaine epidemic is similar in that people weren't trying to figure out how do we help people.
Right.
There were no mental health sessions.
Right.
There were no substance use sessions.
The drug addict became criminalized.
And unfortunately, by families, by people who would say they stole from their family, they stole this, they stole that. And then you add religion to that as well. So the Black politicians made demands, which is interesting because, you know, the 80s, Congressional Black Caucus making money from the tobacco industry, how that all, you know,
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so there's some publications about that as well. So on one end, we can be honest that Black folks, when we don't have resources, and when we say resources, we're not talking about just theoretical and ideas. We're like, what's here now?
Yeah, what's tangible that we can use for our benefit.
Yeah, which is why we tell Black folks, like, I'm not going to say don't call the police. Because that's easy to say. Yeah. But for real, if you're in this situation and something's happening, I mean.
In a lot of cases, and depending on what, you may not have a choice.
And you're hoping that the police don't arrive and act some type of way, because they might. So so on one end, they can say Black folk demanded this, but when non-Black people say that, we're the only people who, when we complain, they're like, well, you said. Every other group, they're not going to do that to any other group. Right. Any other group, they might be like, okay, you all did request this, but I know you all probably wanted it to be a different kind of way. Right. But for us, they say, well, this is what you want, so there's no refund, basically.
Right. And so let's stay here for a minute. So with Cop City and the militarization of the police, obviously that happened way before Cop City was even thought of. But what do you think the two things? A lot of, in Atlanta, we know a lot of these politicians are Black people. And many of these Black politicians will not speak out about Cop City and obviously support Cop City. They'll try to teeter the fence, like, you know, and straddle the fence, like, you know, but at the same time, their words and their actions show that they support Cop City, and some have just come out and said it. This whole idea, and I'll ask my second question about this after this, but this whole idea that representation matters. But in this case, the community is telling these Black politicians that we do not want Cop City. But these black politicians are like, well, you're getting it anyway. What's this whole idea as far as, especially politically, representation matters? Because how does it matter if you're not getting what you want from people that look like you?
Different parts, and that's again the complexity of politicians. So politicians who are opposed to police will not be politicians very long.
Right.
Because their support, their campaign support, their funds come from police departments. Mm-hmm. And so when politicians say they're loyal to Black folks, they will oftentimes be loyal, particularly to middle class Black folks, especially middle class, upper class Black folks, and especially conservative religious Black folks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. The people that, well, you know, that whole thing, like that's why sometimes I have issues with that term Black excellence, right? Not the idea that Black isn't amazing. We know it is. But normally Black excellence is reserved for somebody to be the first African American to do something here, or to be people that they consider and deem acceptable in society. You know, you never hear Black excellence tied to anybody of any type of radical tradition. It's always, you know, something within society that society deems acceptable, for one. And then two, you're right. Anybody that wants to be a politician long, I mean, we even saw this on a national scale with President Obama, when the first week he was in office, Skip Gates had a run-in, you know, with the police at his own home. And Obama's answer, the Black community was like, all right, what you gonna do? Right. And his answer was, let's all have a beer together at your house, Skip. You know what I mean? And I mean, like, if you had any illusion that things were going to be different that first week in office, you should have known then. But when it comes,
he also helped fund AFRICOM. So
yes, he did. You know what I mean? And yeah, terrible. And now they got a Black face, a black head of AFRICOM, and it's crazy. Like, me and brother Dwayne Omawale were talking about how they always put one of us, you know, like, it's no coincidence that they'll put a Black man as the head of AFRICOM. But one more last thing about Cop City, because I really want people to understand how important it is to pay attention to this. There are a lot of platforms that are totally ignoring it, like it's not happening. And but when we talk about the militarization of the police, and we talk about Cop City, which is a compound that's going to further that, what does that mean for the, like, let's say Cop City is up and running for 3 or 4 years. How does that affect the Black community in Atlanta?
They're going to try to disguise it. They're going to just say it's a better trained collective. So, you know, I'm very opposed to bias trainings. I despise implicit bias trainings and bias trainings, and Black folks have made a lot of money from bias training since 2016. So this is where I hold Black folks accountable for that nonsense. But the two groups that harm us the most are the most trained, especially in bias trainings, and that's medical and health professionals and police.
Right.
So they're going to keep that. They're going to do a lot of that nonsense in those spaces. They're going to keep bringing in gear, and they're going to keep bringing in funds.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be trained. The bias trainings are designed to, of course, waste time, to not change policies, not change procedures, to punish people who do try to make real changes, right? That's how I tell my students, you think you'll change some stuff, you'll end up behind a desk or terminated altogether as a cop. So what they're going to be trained to do is to smile at Black folks more. right?
Mm-hmm.
Make more jokes with Black folks. One thing I really don't like, and as someone who, some of my colleagues and people I know very well are cops, former cops, whatever. And I just always tell them, I always have to make that distinction though.
Mm-hmm.
And as Black folk, it can be very difficult doing that with Black cops, because you can appreciate what somebody is accomplishing without pretending that they're not having to ignore a lot of things to keep their job.
Right.
It is impossible to be a cop without having to ignore a lot of things to keep your job.
Right.
So that's going to be the same outcome for Cop City, that they're going to disguise it. They're going to put the same rhetoric in write-ups for funding. They're going to tell Black folks, let's do coffee with the cop. They're going to say, let's have cookout with the cop. They'll say, let's have a basketball tournament with the cop. I want Black folks to understand all of this is paid through your taxes. And as Black folks, we've said for generations in various cities and states, we don't need to use our taxes for you to hang out with us. We literally, we can keep our taxes. Like, we can do our own fish fries, our own book distributions, our own clothes and food giveaways. We don't need to give you money for you to give us these resources, because that is controlling us. That's not helping us. That's controlling us. That's saying, give me this, and then I will tell you how to spend it. Right. So that's what Cop City is gonna keep doing that. And so people who are outraged by this, I encourage balancing that outrage with people who are already making changes with organizations and stuff. Keep doing so. But I just always have to remind people, it's similar to when people are outraged by books in schools and stuff like that. Time wasters are when you pretend that superintendents, teachers, principals, and them are making changes.
Yeah.
These people pretend to be change makers, but all they need is a politician and a school accreditor, or an angry random person who ain't even a parent of a student say, I don't want this book used, and they are very compliant and obedient.
Right.
So I want Black people in particular to know how to not just demand changes, but make changes. And making changes does not mean you actually expect the insiders to be agreeable. And making changes does not mean you're protesting in a physical sense either. And I just tell Black folks, you can see old images of us getting into fist fights with cops, but our elders who have been doing this work for like 60 years, like they like for real, like in their 80s, 90s, they've been doing this. They'll tell you that they did that when they were in their 20s, 30s, because they really didn't have access to stuff that we have access. They really don't want us doing that.
Right.
They don't want us marching along with white progressives. Let the white folks fight these cops. If these white folks want to burn down buildings and fight the cops, let them do that. They want Black folks to learn, since Black folks keep saying, we're learning from our ancestors. We're doing what our ancestors did. Our ancestors, including our ancestors who are still alive, in the sense of, they're our ancestors because they still came before us. They want us to learn from them in terms of what not to do.
Right.
The same way we learn from people like Marcus Garvey, Ida B. Wells and all of them. They don't want us to just model after exactly everything they did. Right. They want us to learn the pros and cons and be like, damn, I ain't doing that.
Right.
So that's something that I think is very important when people are thinking about Cop City and anything else. What's not going to change no matter how much you mess up things? Because they're actually going to, I just tell Black folks, we have to just think about what are some things we're going to do that's going to be a development beyond some videos and photos celebrated on TikTok, and beyond some white Marxists congratulating you and stuff like that. What are Black folks really going to accomplish that the Black folks who've done this work for generations, and especially those who are still alive and who will fuss at you at the next meeting that they're able to attend, will not be disappointed that you're doing that same mess that they did when they was 25. Because they'll be like, dog, I'm 90. I'm 90 now at this damn Pan-African meeting, so your ass ain't doing what I did when I was 25 at that Pan-African meeting. We're supposed to progress. That's the revolution that Harold Cruz said Black folks in the USA have never had for various reasons, including this refusal to have conceptual foundations, refusal to have theoretical foundations, refusal to have an economic development, insisting on holding on to European stuff, including Marxism and communism, and insisting on repeating the same process over and over and over again, instead of saying, okay, doing what other groups do around the world, which is agree, disagree, collaborate, develop from the disagreements together, and say, okay, we're going to do something better each time.
Right. Right.
And so that's what our people need to do.
Yeah, and indeed. Last thing I wanted to ask you about was you had mentioned a certain person that was supposed to be having a school for the past 10 years. And then he was, going viral about from what he said on some podcast. And then also we have another brother who has that a lot of people like, who has been going to court over some very egregious charges involving a young child. Now and so when we talk about not the person that got the school, but somebody else, right?
Yeah.
But when we talk about Pan-Africanism, I noticed that a lot of people who aren't Pan-African, who have Pan-African critiques, and I don't even want to call them critiques, because a critique in most cases is an informed one. People that like to, just push divisiveness, and attacking Pan-Africanism is one way that they do it. They don't attack the ideology, just the idea that, of Black people coming together. But either way, we have so many past and present Pan-African scholars who have done and are doing amazing work. Why, in a lot of circles, do our people only know a handful, and there are YouTubers that have never done any of the things that they say they are going to do? What do you think the reason for that is?
Because Black folks in USA are the Black folks around the world, regarding racial categorization, who are most perplexed, which is why Harold Cruz focuses on Black folks in USA in particular. And this is just one thing I always explain to our people. I might have a certain identity. I might do certain collaborations, be a member of certain collectives, but I don't collaborate with Black folks and say, you have to be part of this.
Right.
You have to have this perspective. You have to have this title. Because guess what? The Black folks who are the most revolutionary are the ones who actually do not adopt those titles. And many don't even join organizations. A lot of times we have a difficult time joining organizations and staying forever, because a lot of times we want organizations to understand how we all have common denominators. And a lot of Black organizations are very divisive amongst each other, because it's like this popularity thing, and thinking that, it has to be who's right, who's wrong. And it's like, okay, we all have rights and wrongs. We do have some foolish conspiracy theories up in here, but what can we do to get to a larger goal? And Black folks in USA are the most perplexed regarding that.
So let me ask you, so do you think oftentimes revolutionaries can let titles and ideologies divide them and keep them from doing the work and collaborating with people of different titles and ideologies that, in most cases would be good, for the community, but due to the fact that they see things differently and some things differently that they won't collab at all.
I mean, look what happens when Black folks who are on this land because of transatlantic slavery say, I'm moving to Africa. I don't care what y'all do in USA. I'm like, I mean, goodness gracious, that sounds like Abraham Lincoln telling us to leave this. Abraham Lincoln wanted us to empty the store shelves because they done found another product. He was like, look, we got to clean this dirt off our shelves. Right. We got some real stuff coming up here to make some money. And then even Marcus Garvey didn't expect all of us to go back to Africa. So like Black folks in USA are the only Black folks really who are like, forget y'all. Whereas Black folks in Canada, Caribbean, South America, Europe, and even Asian nations, you can be pro-Africa, you can want to go there, but usually you're not going to feel like you abandoning your family, your people, and be like, deuces, go for what you know. It's kind of like, it's like Black folk in the USA, it's like kind of like trying a little too hard. So it's kind of like, that's another component of the brainwashing. It's actually very connected to being anti-Black. Like that's a component of being pro-Africa to a form that's anti-Black. This is why I always explain to Black folks. Most Black folks around the world are not pro-Black. Most Black folks are not Pan-African. Most Black folks are not Black nationalists. Most Africans born and raised in African lands are not African nationalists. They may be more in favor of their particular culture. The cultures that existed long before they were forced to become nations. So they might not even be pro that nation. And if they're pro that nation, they might not even be pro the continent. So they're not like pro-African in the sense of African nationalism. So it's Black folks in USA who oftentimes have not read enough. And, not everyone can travel. So I don't always say you got to travel to know. Actually, the wonderful thing about reading, since
I think that does help, though. I think that does help.
Well, traveling does help. But, guess what? Most people on African lands will never travel. But you would never go to Africa and tell them, you know nothing. You ain't been here.
That's true.
You would never have the audacity, right?
Right.
You would never insult, someone in Kenya, Nigeria, Liberia, and say that, right? So, but people want to insult Black folks in USA in particular because of that. Even most Jamaicans will never travel outside Jamaica. But never when you go to Jamaica say, dog, you ain't seen Black folks in France though. You ain't gonna, what I'm saying? It's only Black folks in USA who are told you ain't travel. Most of our people around the world ain't gonna travel. Particularly outside their nation. That's the reality. Like this whole traveling thing, that's a very actually an upper class standpoint that assumes that you actually have the money.
Traveling,
it assumes you have the money.
Internationally is expensive,
Yes, so it assumes you have the money. It assumes that you have the kind of job that allows you to travel. It assumes you have the certain family dynamic. And it also assumes you have the certain health because flying is not good for certain health conditions. There's certain nations around the world that do not have medical help. So if you have a certain health condition and you have a health reaction when you get there, they will tell you that we don't have anyone who specializes in that. You're going to die because your ass wanted to go to that nation.
Wow. That's
really, you know what I'm saying? So that's the full span of our people. So I want Black folks, and I explain this whenever I do this work with our people, when we talk about our people need to travel to Africa, I want our people to understand the complexity that's not just getting your butt on an airline. And it's also not the assumption that you're going to go to a place and feel welcomed necessarily. And if you're not feeling welcomed, don't act like an American and be like, I'm here now, though. You know what I'm saying? Okay, you're not. I mean, that's the problem that happened in Liberia, right? You know? And so, and of course, eventually, there are Liberians who migrated to USA, which is wild because of how
Liberia was created, right?
So that's just the span of what I just always explain, that Black folks in USA tend to have this certain convenient version that's and also we just don't all have to have a certain identity in terms of having a certain title.
Yeah.
And people who do have the title, that's fine. But I want our people to understand, if you're really involved in our communities, that could be local, national, and global, you got to know what it means to unite with our people and not expect most of our people to ever, maybe never heard of Marcus Garvey. Definitely most of our people are not Garveyites, not Du Boisian, not, Rodneys. I mean, not anything that you think is a quote unquote normal approach to changing our people. Most of our people who are change makers, who are actually doing real work to help our people, are not reading what you're reading. They're not taking the title that you've taken. They're not even walking around with, red, black, and green buttons on. You're not gonna go up to them and be like, you don't know nothing about Garvey's flag. I wear RBG, I wear that, but I would never go around and be like, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to like. And again, this is why I just say this is one thing we got to defer to our elders who've been doing this work for 50 plus years, because back in their day, they knew that the way to reach our people and unite and actually collaborate was to not pretend that everybody got to do that, because it's almost like the equivalent of like a Bible thumper, Quran thumper, Torah thumper, you got to do it exactly this way.
Yeah, you're making
this
it
button.
religious.
Yeah, you got to wear this button, do it this way, wave this flag, or else. And it can be ideal that you want it to fit your style, but like, again, hip hop, many styles. We can all have these many styles alongside each other, and that's how it should be. Indeed,
man, that's powerful answer, and we can end it off there. Dr. Kimya, it's always a pleasure to build. I got some more stuff I want to talk to you about, and so we'll set something else up again, but thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Indeed. But before we go though, I know your office socials. If people want to be able to, I guess, follow your works and what you're doing, how can they get them?
Thank you. So they can go 365diversity.com. They can find my link tree, which is Dr. Kimya Nuru Dennis. They can find me on Instagram. They can even find me on TikTok. I still don't understand TikTok, but I got on there. I was like, okay. But I probably do more on Instagram now, and that's it basically. So yeah.
No doubt. Now I'll put the link tree in the description. But again, thank you. It's always a pleasure.